Hello everyone and welcome to one of the greatest tournaments ever held, featuring a lineup that you could only dream of. Yes, it is only a 6-player double round robin, but the players here are, just sensational. Magnus Carlsen, Gukesh, the reigning world champion, Fabiano Caruana, Hikaru Nakamura, Arjun Erigasi, and Wei Yi. That alone, I think, will topple any event that can possibly be organized in the world. And also, the tournament now features a women's section, and in the women's section, you have Zhu Wenjun, the reigning world champion, Lei Ting-jae, Hampi Koneru, Anna Muzichuk, Vaishali, and Sara Kadem. And what's interesting about this tournament is actually a couple of things. You get 3 points for a win, not 2 points, and also if there is a draw in the classical section, you immediately go into Armageddon. So it cannot be that today's contest will be decided in a draw. There will always be a winner. Although you don't get the full 3 points for a win, still the matchup will be decided. And Magnus Carlsen versus Gukesh, it doesn't get any better than that. It's basically the ruler without a crown versus the crown bearer that, at least for the moment, does not rule. It is the greatest matchup we could possibly have today, and I'm sure everyone is looking forward to this one. Like I said, it's a double round robin, so first Magnus will have white against Gukesh, then in the second half of the tournament, Gukesh will have white against Magnus. Let's check it out. It's quite a game, and well, very interesting. Everything from the variation that was used, you have to get used to the time format because it's not your everyday time format. It's 120 minutes for the first 40 moves, and then only after move 41 you get 10 seconds increment. So definitely something to get used to. So yeah, let's check it out. Can Magnus take down the world classical champion? Magnus has the white pieces, and he opens with pawn to d4. Gukesh strikes with knight to f6, and we have knight to c3. We have pawn to d5 and bishop to f4. Not your regular London. The regular London is knight f3, d4, bishop to f4. But also, it's very interesting, very, very popular today. And basically is the Chigorin variation of the queen's pawn opening. We have pawn to c5. This is the most popular reply, and it is the one, for example, Magnus Carlsen used himself to defeat Alireza Firouzja. We have pawn to e3, and now c captures on d4 is the move pretty much everyone plays here. A6, second most played move, even though bishop to g4 is the second, or maybe sometimes even depending on how you let the engine run. Maybe even the first choice recommended by the engine, but it is the one that Gukesh goes for. He goes bishop g4, and now there are some games where pawn to f3 was played, bishop to e2, only one game in the database. This is what Magnus goes for, even though the engine already criticizes it, says that it's not a mistake, okay, it's an inaccuracy, f3 gives white a better game, but obviously Magnus and Gukesh know what they're talking about here. It's one thing listening to the engine, it's completely the other thing when someone of their strength explains it, because sometimes the engine will say, okay, this is a superior move, but a very, very strong player knows that there's nothing to look for there. It's at best a draw. So okay, bishop captures, and now there is a game where queen captures was played. Here we have knight c captures on e2 by Magnus, and it is now already, as of move 6, that we have a completely new game. And that's, absolutely amazing. Magnus versus Gukesh, move 6 in a classical game, completely new game with so much time on the clock. This is just beautiful to watch. Knight to c6 by Gukesh. Okay, knight to f3, we have pawn to e6 and pawn to c3. So all pretty standard moves that you would expect from, let's say, a London system. We have bishop to e7 and knight to g3. Castles kingside by Gukesh and queen to e2. Okay, you might have to worry about some queen b5 action, but other than that, not a lot happening. Maybe e4 in some lines. Okay. Pawn to h6, we have rook to d1, as the d1 square has been vacated, and now queen to a5. And you really can't feel bad about black pieces here. You have all of your pieces developed, the rooks are now coming into the game, the rooks have been connected. B5, if it can be played, it's going to be beautiful for black, so, yeah, I mean, it's more than I would say Gukesh could hope for on move 11 against Magnus. We have pawn to a3, rook f to d8, and now pawn to h4 by Magnus. We have queen to a4. The idea behind queen to a4, although you might say, okay, why break opening principles like this? Why not get the rook into the game? Maybe a6 b5, maybe rook to c8. The reason is Gukesh wants to play queen to c4, and indeed, should Magnus rush with castling, let's say castles kingside, queen to c4 is extremely annoying here and not easy to meet. I mean, the engine says, okay, you should play something like rook to d3. I don't know who plays rook to d3, but just to give you an example, if you trade, then let's say d captures once another pawn is exchanged in the center, there will be no e pawn for white. Once this knight lands on d5, it's going to be a very, very pleasant position to play for black. So that is why Magnus goes knight e5. He stops queen to c4, plus it's just very annoying for your opponent to have a knight on e5. Gukesh immediately trades it. Knight captures, bishop captures, and knight to d7. Now, if you try forcing queen to c4, it's not as potent because you can just trade, for example, captures, captures, and if, let's say, bishop captures, and f4, not all that much to black for to claim here. Like c captures, you're going to play e captures, and the white is excellent here. The knight will come to e4, you will force the bishop back to e7, and the knight will have excellent coverage of the opponent's half of the field on the e4 square. So after bishop captures on e5, Gukesh drives the bishop back, knight to d7, bishop to f4, and now queen to a6. Again, offering a queen trade. And here, up until this point, I think everything is pretty normal, but you would expect Magnus to trade queens here. Why not? You mess up your opponent's pawn structure, you go king d2, king c2, and it looks very nice. But Magnus does not trade queens, and this is very odd because, you know, they call him the god of the endgame. Why would he not go into a favorable endgame? But he has something else in mind. Okay, goes queen f3. We have bishop to d6. Bishop to f8 also not to be discarded easily. You know, just helps out with the defense of the black king. Maybe you go rook e8. Maybe you strike with e5 at some point. But okay, Gukesh goes bishop to d6. And now knight to h5. Magnus says, okay, you can capture on f4. I'm ready to go after your king. I might capture with the knight, I might recapture with the queen, maybe some g4, g5 action. Still, the king is on e1, so it's not as pleasant, but, you know, you have to see what Magnus will do. And you could also capture on d4 first, then Magnus trades on d6, and then maybe some e5 in the future. But Gukesh trades with bishop captures, queen captures, and the immediate pawn to e5. He wants to win the center. Magnus goes queen g3, as it comes with the threat of checkmate, and now again queen to g6. Gukesh now again wants to trade queens, and here Magnus says, yes, I will now trade, now I feel it is favorable for me. Captures, captures, knight back to g3, and e captures on d4. We have c captures, and Gukesh closes the center with pawn to c4. And if you have to make sort of a rough assessment of the position, the material is equal. Gukesh has a doubled g pawn, and he has a potentially weak d5 pawn. The knight can definitely come to attack it, maybe with some knight e2, knight f4 action, and later on e4 can be played maybe to undermine the c pawn. So a little bit of an advantage for Magnus here in terms of space control. We have knight to e2 immediately by Magnus, pawn to b5, and okay, now another target has presented itself. Magnus just goes knight c3, attacks both of the pawns. Knight f6 defends the d5 pawn, invites knight captures on b5, but should you capture on b5, then you can go rook 8 to b8, and then the b2 pawn becomes weak. Or you maybe defend it with a4, then a6, or even if you capture with knight captures on a7, then you can go rook captures on b2. Yes, you're up a pawn for the moment, but rook a8 will come. It's not nothing spectacular. So after knight f6, rook to b1 by Magnus. He wants to bust open the position with b3, and Gukesh goes rook 8 to b8. We have pawn to f3, controlling the knight on f6 and preparing pawn to e4, and pawn to a5. And we know what Gukesh wants to play. He wants to strike with pawn to b4. And indeed, b3 would be too mild here. If you play pawn b3, pawn to b4 comes, and after you trade captures, the knight moves pawn to c3. Okay, that's a very annoying pass pawn. So after a5, Magnus immediately strikes with pawn to b4. We have c captures on b3 en passant, rook captures on b3, and now pawn to b4. we have a captures and rook captures. And now Magnus goes rook to a3. He goes after the a5 pawn. And okay, I mean, it's a perfectly fine position. You just have to play the endgame against arguably the greatest endgame player who ever lived. Okay, rook to e8. Gukesh goes after the e3 pawn. We have king to d2. We have rook to b2 with check and king to d3. Sorry, I had a phone call there. King to d3 and rook captures on g2. We have rook captures on a5 and rook to g3 now, going after the f3 pawn. Rook to f1, Magnus defends, and pawn to g5, getting rid of the doubled pawn. H captures, we have rook. You could also capture with the h pawn, but, you know, if you can undouble your pawns, so why not do so? And Magnus goes rook f to a1, doubles up on the a file with some ideas of maybe trading off a pair of rooks, or, you know, just nicely controlling the board. h5, Gukesh says, well, that's all very nice. I'm the only one with a passed pawn here, and I'm advancing it. Pawn to h5. Rook to a8 by Magnus. We have rook captures with check, and king to h7. Pawn to e4. Magnus wants to create a passed pawn as well. D captures, we have F captures, and now pawn to h4, and Magnus strikes with pawn to e5. And this is now, with so little time on the clock, extremely difficult to calculate. How do you assess this? Okay, you could move the knight, but you could also maybe not move the knight. The problem with moving the knight, let's say you go knight to g4, is that now after pawn to e4, let's say pawn to h3, the race doesn't really work in your favor due to knight e4. And now you can't even sacrifice the rook because knight captures comes with check. And if you go rook to h5, then look at this, e7, and after h2, you're going to go rook to h8 with check. That's the problem. And now after king captures e8 queen, king h7, you're going to capture with check. King moves, you're going to capture, obviously not on h2, but you can go knight g5. You cannot advance the pawn. I mean, it's game over. This will be checkmate. That's it. So Gukesh plays the best possible move. And okay, move 40 has been played. They do now get 10 seconds increment, so it's not as, you know, as terrible. Plays pawn to h3. He sacrifices the knight. Okay, he captures with h2. Magnus strikes with pawn to f7. And now the question is what to play here. Again, Gukesh chooses rook to g3 check, which is perfectly fine. You could also play it the other way around. Just to give you an example, h1 queen, f8 queen, and now you start with rook to g3 check, and you can indeed force a perpetual here. King to c2, queen to g2 with check, king b3, and now this queen to d5 check as the knight is pinned, and if the king goes to b2, now queen to b7 check, and you use this diagonal to force a perpetual, and it works. Or even if king to b2, you can even repeat queen to g2 with check. If king to b1, you can then go to b7 with check, king to c2, as the knight has to be defended. And then, okay, you repeat queen to g2 with check. So after f7, Gukesh started with rook to g3 check. Magnus played king to d2, a little bit different than king to c2, as you'll see. And now Gukesh brought a queen into the game. Magnus also brings a queen into the game. And now, what do you play here? You have only one move that does not lose the game. What would you play here as black? Probably if you've been listening to the previous variation, you know that the move is rook to g2 check. This is the only way to do it. And then after king to d3, you will repeat rook to g3 check. If you repeat, okay, then rook g2. And if king to c2, then queen to g2 check, king b3. And you again use this diagonal to force a perpetual. That is the only way to do it. However, after f8 queen, Gukesh played queen to h8 with check. And it's almost the same, but not quite due to the d4 pawn. Unfortunately for Gukesh, now Magnus plays queen to c2, and after queen to g6 check, Magnus plays king to b2. Queen to b6 check, now Magnus goes king to a2, and there's no queen to f2 check. Well, there's a pawn there, and the queen is guarding the f2 square. So you have to try some other way to do it, and you can't just easily get a perpetual. He goes rook to g2 check, king a3, queen to b2 with check, king to a4, and now you could continue checking with queen to a1 check, but after king b3 and queen to b2 with check, king c4, there are no more checks. The knight is just such a powerful defender. you have to give a move to white, and you know that queen to h8 is coming. So after king to a4, Gukesh said, all right, I might as well capture the knight, and now he equalizes in material, but Magnus having the move is all that Magnus needs to take this game. Queen captures on c3, queen to h8 with check, king to g6, we have rook to a6 with check, king to f5, and now queen to f8 with check. Magnus playing with engine-like precision, king to e4, and now there is only one move that wins the game, but I'm pretty sure you guys see which one it is. Have at it while I give you a couple of seconds. Yes, the move in question is queen to... I'm only kidding. It is rook to e6 with check. This is what Magnus played, and he was in this position on move 55 that Gukesh Domaraju, reigning world classical champion, resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. If you go up the board, king to d5, it's a fairly quick checkmate, queen to f5 with check, and then after king to c4, you will give queen to b5 with check, after capturing on d4, as this is your only option, queen d7 check, and now finally after king to c4, rook to c6 will be checkmate due to the white king, so nicely controlling the black king. And on the other hand, if after rook to e6 check, you go for the best possible defense for black, that is king to d3, okay, it takes a few more moves, but still, queen f3 check, and it's even easier, because if you go down the board, then queen captures and g2 comes with check, then you're just going to be down a full rook, and if you go king to c4, then rook to c6 with check, and you don't even have to capture the queen, even though you could, it is much faster to just checkmate the black king. Rook to d6 check, king to e5, rook to d5 check, and now just a nice ladder checkmate, rook to d7, king to e8, and queen to f7 will be checkmate. So yeah, very nicely played by both of them. Magnus goes for the not London system, and Gukesh played everything perfectly, but you know, he gave him that one opportunity, Magnus took it, and that was all Magnus needed to take the game. So it's very hard to say. I mean, all up to this point, Gukesh played everything perfectly, but here he just allowed for a situation where, okay, first either you give a check or you bring out the queen. He decided, even before this, he decided to go for rook to g3 check instead of h1 queen. h1 queen maybe would be a lot easier to draw, so I imagine Gukesh was trying to win the game with rook to g3 check. Hard to say, but yeah. He gave him one chance, and after queen to h6, that is all Magnus needed to take the game. So that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. A lot of other very nice games have been played. Hikaru versus Fabiano, also Wei Yi versus Arjun. We'll be covering those games as well. So stay tuned. I would like to thank Samuel Kamuli, Nidhi Kumar, Markus Shib, Mariusz Klimek, and Zeni for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.